March 1943, Pearl Harbor Submarine Base. Commander Eugene Fluckey watches as fuel technicians pump a new diesel blend into USS Barb's tanks. Darker, denser, burning hotter than standard Navy fuel. The substance is experimental, classified. Developed in secret by petroleum chemists who spent 18 months refining crude oil into something unprecedented. High cetane submarine diesel that increases engine output by 22% without sacrificing reliability. Most submarine commanders don't know it exists. Fluckey does because Barb is the test platform, the boat that will prove whether this fuel delivers the tactical advantages the Navy desperately needs. Speed. American submarines are slower on the surface than Japanese destroyers, forcing them to dive and evade rather than pursue and engage. Accuracy. Torpedoes fired from moving submarines at moving targets require complex calculations that fail when the firing platform lacks speed to close distance rapidly. This fuel promises to change both equations. Barb will be faster, more maneuverable, capable of surface chases that were suicidal with standard diesel. She will position for torpedo shots with precision that was impossible before. But there's a catch. The fuel burns so hot it stresses engines beyond design limits. Failures could leave Barb dead in hostile waters. The Bureau of Ships won't authorize fleet-wide deployment until field tests prove the fuel works under combat conditions. Fluckey has 60 days to take Barb into Japanese-controlled waters, hunt convoys, engage destroyers, and return with data proving this fuel is the weapon that will turn the submarine war. If the engines hold, Barb will become the deadliest submarine in the Pacific. If they fail, she'll be a tomb. By early 1943, American submarines were sinking Japanese merchant ships at an accelerating rate, strangling supply lines, crippling the Empire's ability to sustain offensive operations. But the submarine force faced persistent tactical limitations. Gaito-class submarines, the backbone of the Pacific Fleet, could manage 20 knots on the surface. Fast enough to pursue merchant vessels, but not fast enough to chase destroyers or evade aggressive escorts. Submerged speed was worse. 9 knots maximum, barely enough to maneuver into firing position. Japanese destroyers, by contrast, could reach 30 knots, allowing them to run down surfaced submarines, force them underwater, and depth, charge them at leisure. The speed differential dictated tactics. American submarines operated cautiously, attacking from ambush positions, fleeing when detected, avoiding surface engagements. Aggressive commanders like Dudley Morton and Samuel Dealey pushed boundaries, attacking closer to shore, pursuing targets longer, but even they were constrained by speed limitations. The torpedo problem compounded the issue. American Mark 14 torpedoes, after years of malfunction, had finally been fixed by 1943, but firing them accurately still required getting close to targets, ideally within 2,000 yards. Closing that distance while the target maneuvered and escorts hunted, you demanded speed the submarines didn't have. Commanders compensated with positioning and patience, but both consumed time and opportunity. The Navy needed a technological edge, something that would give submarines the speed to dominate surface engagements rather than merely survive them. The answer came from an unexpected source: petroleum engineers at Standard Oil's research division in New Jersey. They had been experimenting with diesel fuel refinement, attempting to increase cetane ratings, the measure of ignition quality that determined combustion efficiency. Higher cetane meant more complete combustion, more power per unit of fuel, more thrust from the same engines. By early 1942, they had developed a blend with a cetane rating of 65, significantly higher than the Navy's standard 45 rated fuel. Laboratory tests showed a 22% increase in engine output with minimal increase in fuel consumption. The fuel was more expensive to produce, required specialized refining, and its long-term effects on engine wear were unknown. But if it worked in combat, it would revolutionize submarine operations. The Bureau of Ships was skeptical. Diesel engines were precision instruments, designed for specific fuel grades. Changing fuel composition risked accelerated wear, overheating, or catastrophic failure. But Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Pacific submarine operations, saw potential. He authorized a controlled field test, 1 submarine, 1 patrol, with engineers monitoring engine performance continuously. if the fuel delivered tactical advantages without destroying the engines. Fleet-wide deployment would follow. USS Barb was selected because of her commander. Eugene Fluckey was methodical, technically knowledgeable, and aggressive enough to push the fuel to its limits. He would test it under conditions that mattered: surface chases, extended high-speed runs, rapid maneuvering during attacks. Barb's crew was briefed on the experiment, told the fuel was experimental, warned that engine failures could occur. No one requested transfer. They trusted Fluckey, and they wanted to be part of something that might change the war. Barb departed Pearl Harbor on March 28, 1943, carrying the experimental fuel, 24 torpedoes, and orders to patrol the waters off Formosa and the Luzon Strait, high-traffic convoy routes where Japanese shipping concentrated. The first days were uneventful, Barb running submerged during daylight, surfacing at night to recharge batteries and transit. Fluckey used the time to test the fuel under controlled conditions, running the diesels at progressively higher outputs, monitoring temperatures, vibrations, and fuel consumption. The engines ran hot, exhaust temperatures 15% higher than normal, but within tolerances. Speed increased noticeably. At full power, Barb achieved 24 knots, 4 knots faster than her rated maximum. The crew felt the difference immediately. Smoother acceleration, tighter turns, the boat responding crisply to helm commands. But the real test would come under combat conditions. On April 3rd, Barb detected a convoy. 8 merchant vessels escorted by 4 destroyers, moving northwest at 12 knots. Standard doctrine said wait for the convoy to pass, attack from ambush, dive after firing torpedoes. Fluckey decided to test the fuel's tactical potential differently. He would pursue the convoy on the surface, using speed to position ahead of their course, then attack from optimal range and angle. It was aggressive, risky, exactly what the fuel was designed to enable. Barb surfaced 6 miles astern of the convoy, engines roaring to full power, racing northwest at 24 knots. The destroyers, detecting Barb's radar signature, turned to investigate, increasing speed to intercept. Fluckey held course, closing distance, gambling that Barb's speed advantage would allow her to reach the merchant ships before destroyers could engage. For 20 minutes it was a chase, Barb surging forward, destroyers converging, the gap narrowing. At 0430 hours, Barb reached firing position 3,000 yards ahead of the convoy. Fluckey ordered emergency dive, taking Barb to periscope depth, setting up torpedo solutions on 2 merchant ships. The destroyers were still 2 miles away, racing toward Barb's last known position, but she was already submerged, invisible, torpedoes ready. Fluckey fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession, 2 at each of 3 targets. 4 hit, sinking 2 freighters and damaging a tanker. Barb went deep, evading depth charges from destroyers that arrived minutes too late. The attack succeeded because of speed. Barb had closed distance faster than the enemy anticipated, positioned precisely, struck before defenses could respond. The fuel had worked. Fluckey transmitted a coded report to Pearl Harbor. High cetane fuel enables surface pursuit tactics previously impossible. Engines performing within acceptable parameters. Recommend continuation of test. But the fuel's true potential wouldn't be revealed until Barb encountered a situation where standard tactics would have meant retreat. On April 9th, Barb detected a Japanese destroyer operating alone, patrolling a convoy route, moving at 25 knots, faster than any Gaito-class submarine's rated surface speed. Doctrine said ignore destroyers, too fast to chase, too dangerous to engage. Fluckey saw an opportunity to test the fuel's upper limits. He ordered Barb to pursue at maximum speed, pushing the diesels beyond rated capacity, chasing a target that should have been uncatchable. For 90 minutes, Barb ran at 24 knots. Engines screaming, exhaust stacks glowing, the boat vibrating with barely controlled power. The destroyer, unaware she was being pursued, maintained course. Fluckey closed to within 4,000 yards, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough for a long-range torpedo shot. He fired 3 torpedoes, angled for intercept. One struck, blowing off the destroyer's stern, leaving her crippled and burning. Barb withdrew before escorts could respond. Fluckey's report was terse but significant. engaged and crippled destroyer at speeds previously unattainable. High cetane fuel enables offensive operations against targets doctrine considers invulnerable. The tactical revelation wasn't just speed, it was what speed enabled. Faster surface running meant submarines could reposition between attacks without submerging, conserving battery power, staying combat ready longer. It meant pursuing fleeing targets rather than watching them escape. It meant engaging destroyers offensively rather than defensively. Fluckey began employing tactics that would have been suicidal with standard fuel. He chased convoys into harbors, surfaced to finish crippled ships with deck guns, pursued targets through defended waters where enemy reinforcements could respond quickly. The fuel gave him options, and options created dominance. By mid-April, Barb had sunk 12 ships, more than most submarines achieved in 2 patrols. The crew was exhausted but exhilarated. They were operating at a tempo other boats couldn't match, attacking with aggression that doctrine said was impossible. And the engines, despite running beyond design limits, held. Temperatures remained high but stable. Fuel consumption increased marginally. Wear patterns were accelerated but manageable. The fuel worked. Fluckey's final test came on April 22nd, when Barb encountered a situation no submarine wanted: daylight detection by aircraft while surfaced, 40 miles from the nearest diving water, with destroyers converging. Standard response: crash, dive, evade, hope the destroyers lose contact. But Barb was too far from deep water. Diving would only delay the inevitable depth charge attack. Fluckey made a decision that validated everything the fuel promised. He kept Barb on the surface, pushed the diesels to absolute maximum, 26 knots, 2 knots beyond the test parameters, and ran. Not toward deep water, toward a rain squall visible on radar 15 miles away. If Barb could reach the squall before the destroyers intercepted, she could dive under cover, evade visually, escape before sonar locked her position. It was a race: Barb's speed versus destroyer pursuit, diesel engines versus tactical geometry. The destroyers closed from 3 directions, searchlights sweeping, guns trained. Range dropping below 10 miles. Barb's diesels roared, exhaust pouring black smoke, the boat shaking with barely controlled vibration. Fluckey stood on the bridge, binoculars fixed on the squall, calculating closing speed, estimating whether they would make it. At 7 miles, the first destroyer opened fire, shells impacting 500 yards astern, walking closer. At 5 miles, Barb entered the squall. Rain hammering the deck, visibility dropping to 0. Fluckey ordered emergency dive, taking Barb down into the concealing water. Engines finally throttling back. The boat slipping beneath the surface just as destroyers reached the squall's edge. They searched for hours, sonar pinging, depth charges dropping on false contacts. Barb evaded silent and deep, surviving because she had been fast enough to reach cover before being caught. The fuel had saved them. Barb returned to Pearl Harbor on May 10, 1943. Her patrol report documenting 12 confirmed sinks, 3 damaged vessels, 1 destroyer crippled, and tactical innovations enabled entirely by high cetane fuel. Engineering inspections revealed accelerated wear on piston rings and fuel injectors. But nothing catastrophic, nothing that couldn't be managed with more frequent maintenance intervals. Admiral Lockwood read Fluckey's report, consulted with engineering staff, and authorized fleet-wide deployment. By June 1943, every submarine in the Pacific was receiving high cetane fuel. The impact was immediate and transformational. Submarines began operating aggressively, pursuing targets that had been considered too fast, engaging destroyers offensively, conducting surface chases that doctrine had said were impossible. Kill rates increased. Patrol durations extended. Submarine dominance in the Pacific became absolute. The Japanese never understood what changed. Intelligence reports noted that American submarines seemed faster, more aggressive, capable of sustained high-speed operations. Some analysts speculated about engine upgrades, new propulsion systems, secret technologies. None identified the fuel. It was a quiet revolution, invisible to the enemy, unheralded in public accounts, but decisive in outcome. By 1945, American submarines had sunk over 5 million tons of Japanese shipping, strangling the empire's logistics, isolating garrisons, crippling the economy. High cetane fuel hadn't won the war alone, but it had enabled the tactics that made victory inevitable. Eugene Fluckey continued commanding Barb through the war's end, sinking a total of 17 ships, earning the Medal of Honor, pioneering tactics that became doctrine. But he rarely mentioned the fuel, understanding that tactical advantages were preserved through secrecy. Post-war, the fuel's development was declassified, studied in engineering schools, recognized as an example of how incremental technological improvements could produce disproportionate strategic effects. The chemists who developed it received no public recognition, their work classified for decades. But their contribution was as significant as any weapon system deployed during the war. They had given American submarines the speed to dominate, the endurance to persist, and the tactical flexibility to innovate. And in doing so, they had proven that wars are won not just by courage and tactics, but by the invisible advantages that make courage effective and tactics possible. Would you have pushed those engines beyond their limits, trusting chemistry over caution, speed over safety? Subscribe for more untold naval stories.